I consider myself, for example, a recovering racist, David. I don't think any white person born and raised in the South ever overcomes the effects of the scarlet fever of racism. You can tell yourself and you can think to yourself mentally that I'm past this. My conversion put me on the other side of this matter, but it's still there. It will pop up in the darndest places.
All righty. Welcome in. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon and
David Person.
How are you, David?
Man, it's all right for we're taping this on a Wednesday. It's a rainy day, but it's still a good day.
I'm unhappy, David.
You don't like the cloud, the temp. I know you don't like the temperature.
Yeah, the temperature is ridiculous. Okay, let's just be honest about this. The temperature it's unlivable. Okay, you might die if you go outside right now. Okay, it's just atrocious out there. And I am in mourning because this is what appears to be, and I was told this was not going to happen. I was assured this was not going to happen anymore, but apparently we're leaving daylight savings time at the end of this week again.
That's it. That's
rolling the clocks back for some unknown reasons. For the next 2 months, my daughter will wake up an hour earlier than she should, and it is just, there's no reason for this. There's no reason for this, and we're.
So it takes her 2 months to get acclimated to the new time.
Yeah, I mean it takes a while. I don't know that it would necessarily be 2 months, but it takes a little while. Yeah, I mean the poor thing is still not really recovered from the trip to Europe. She's still waking up at like 5 o'clock in the morning now because it's we had such a tremendous time difference over there, and she still can't quite get right. But
she had a nice time though, didn't she? She had a time,
she had a great time. She loved it. She really did love it. She loved walking around. I had pictures of her and her mom, my wife, shopping. Yeah. And carrying their little bags down the Paris streets and going to different places. She got to go in we made a little trip so she could create her own lip balm and perfume, and she did that. Yeah. And it was really something. So yeah, no, it was great. It was a really great trip, and really enjoyed it. And hey, before we move forward, if you are looking for a nice place to spend some time, well, there are 3 great resorts in this state that are operated by the folks at Wind Creek Entertainment, who sponsor this show. It's Alabama Politics This Week, brought to you by Wind Creek Entertainment, and we really appreciate them for what they do for us, and we really wish you would go by and support them as well. They have great facilities in Wetumpka, Atmore, and Montgomery. Go by the resorts in Wetumpka and Atmore are first class. I've stayed at the one in Atmore. David stayed at the one in Wetumpka. They are, I'm telling you, they're top level. You're not going to beat them. The spas, the restaurants, the games, just the options around there, the pool area. Probably getting a little too chilly at this point now for the pool and stuff, but they've got some other options. And hey, I'll tell you this as well. Don't sleep on OWA. Okay, so OWA is their water park and amusement park in Foley, and it is a fantastic place. We went there actually this week last year. We took my daughter down there to OWA. Cried when we left. And talked about what a great time we had at the indoor water park. You can't beat that as well. Got some really great rides around there, so try that as well. But listen, check them out online at Wind Creek Entertainment. Go and book a stay and have a good time. Have yourself a nice time. I'm telling you, you're not going to regret it. You can call us I'll tell you this: if you regret it, call David and tell him that, number 1, you don't know what's going on, and number 2, he'll pick up the tab. Don't worry. David's got a lot of money. He's got a lot of money.
I wish from your lips to God's ears.
Right.
I wish.
All right. Let's move forward. We're still in the midst of a shutdown that has now stretched on for what are we upwards of 25 days or so now. We don't seem to be heading towards any sort of a solution. Although I'm going to guess that what happened today speeds things along a bit, because as of today, just read through a New York Times story a few minutes ago about the Obamacare That's the marketplace from which a number of Americans, millions of Americans, now purchase health insurance, provide for their families that way. The prices have just dropped on the websites, and so you can actually see what now you will be paying for you and your family to purchase health care through the marketplace exchanges, the ones that are either run by the federal government or the ones that are operated by your state. Not surprisingly, the ones that are operated by the states, from the states that decided to do Medicaid expansion and open up their own exchanges and put some time and effort into this thing and creating a marketplace that was more consumer friendly and gave you a lot more options. Those are surprisingly a lot cheaper, but they're still increasing in price thanks to the Trump administration and what's gone on with the way they've been handling things. The federally run exchanges, the prices there are some 30% higher, according to a review by the Kaiser Family Foundation, 17% higher in states that are operating their own exchanges. So you're going to lose those. But now the big argument, and I wrote about this this week because I think to me, this highlights the basic differences between the two parties right now. And you can talk about wokeness and DEI and transgender this and bathrooms that and all of this stuff. Okay, you can talk about all of it. But to me, the difference in the parties right now is the shutdown fight. We're on one side, and listen, none of what I'm about to say is an opinion. Okay, this is not an opinion. All right. On the one side are the Republicans who want to continue forward with the big, beautiful bill cuts that are coming for the subsidies related to the Obamacare exchanges, cuts that will drive up insurance costs and the cost of health care overall for the American people. That's just a fact. That's going to happen. All right. If these cuts go into effect, it's going to happen. And those subsidy cuts affect some of the poorest Americans and working families in this country. Those are what the fight is about, those cuts, okay? And the Republicans want to push those through in order to pay for some of the tax cuts that they've offered primarily to the wealthiest families and corporations in this country. Also not an opinion. That's a fact. I can show you the figures and the numbers, all right? Under the big, beautiful bill, the poorest in this country pay more in taxes than they did before it, and the top 1% of earners get a great, big, huge tax break out of this thing, all right? That's where the money's going. Democrats on the other side have stood their ground because none of them voted for the big, beautiful bill. None of them voted for that thing and tried to stop it when it was going through and warned the country that this is what's going to happen if these cuts went into effect, that millions of people would lose their health care coverage and it would drive up costs for all of us. And so they are standing their ground in the only forum that they have, which is the fight over funding the government, continuing to fund the government. And this is the only leverage that they have to stop this. Okay? And that's where the fight is. And to me, that signifies the difference between the two parties. For all the problems that we may have with the Democratic Party, for all the times that we've criticized them for stupidity and things that they didn't necessarily address, and all the issues that we have taken with them. At the end of the day, the one thing that I feel like I know for sure is that the Democrats are coming at this from a bottom-up perspective and a bottom-up approach on things, and that they are going to take the right road on issues such as this. And to me, that's just life in America right now. And we have a lot of people who have bought into the rhetoric and the scare tactics and they want to give immigrants health care as though immigrants aren't humans and as though that were true. And here we are with this choice.
Yeah. And the whole thing about wanting to give immigrants health care is not only a lie in terms of what is being implied, which is that, there's some desire to give undocumented people access to health care the same way that the rest of us get it. The only thing that was ever being, I think, presented was that if somebody is in an emergency situation and they have to go to a hospital, of course the hospital Hippocratic oath and all that other stuff, ethical reasons. Of course, a hospital is going to, provide that person with care as they should, whether that person is documented, undocumented, insured, uninsured. I mean, that's what hospital emergency rooms are supposed to do, and that's the way it works. That's the way it functions.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well,
I think you're right. I think
there was one piece of it where some immigrants that were here awaiting their turn in the asylum system that were legally here. They were here legally. These were not undocumented people. These were documented people. But those folks were able to have health care.
And I think that's also a place where the language and the communication has gotten muddied because, as you pointed out, anybody who's in the system, in the process of following what the government has laid out, cannot be called undocumented. Not logically, not literally. That person is a documented person. They may not be a citizen. They may not have a green card, but they are documented and they are following the legal processes. So I think there's been a real failure in messaging there when it comes to how we talk about people who are in that category. But you're exactly right. And I want to say this. I know that there has, we have at times lauded Senator Katie Britt on this podcast for certain things that she's done. But I think something that she's done very recently is very indicative of exactly what you're talking about, Josh, because as we know now, she is promoting this legislation that I think Josh Hawley, I think he was the original sponsor, to try to get make sure that SNAP benefits are going to be going to people, which would include, if I'm not mistaken, about 700,000 Alabamians. Well, here's the problem. If they had really been concerned, Josh Hawley, Katie Britt, and others, if they had really been concerned about these people, this would have been done at the beginning. It's now day 29 that we're into this shutdown, that now all of a sudden they're talking about, we're going to do this because the Democrats have been obstructing us and they're not cooperating. They're being selfish. They're playing political games. No, you all are playing political games because if you weren't, this would have been done at the onset. This would have been done, in fact, even before the onset, knowing that we were going to come to this point. I mean, everybody knew, we all were talking about it. Alabama Arise and other organizations were sounding the alarm about what was going to happen to people on SNAP. And it now took 29 days for Republicans to say, maybe we should come up with something for people on SNAP.
Yeah. Well,
please. I mean, it's a bunch of garbage.
Well, of course it is. I mean, now I will say in their defense, they don't read. But listen, it's,
What, they don't read what? They don't read, what are they not reading that they didn't know that?
Anything.
And they couldn't have done that.
No, listen, no, you're right, of course. Listen, you're right, of course. Can I say something that's gonna sound a little radical? Okay.
Okay.
And because we do this, and I was just guilty of it myself. Where we talk about, they're not giving health care to illegal immigrants here, okay? They're not saying that illegal immigrants can go get health care. I don't have a problem with illegal immigrants getting health care. I don't. I don't have a single solitary problem with a human being that requires health care to go and get it. I don't have any problem with that.
I agree.
I think that there can be a system in place in which, such as the one that's in Europe right now. Bill and Susan, who I work with at Britt at APR, and they are in Europe, have been for a time. Bill got a stomach bug, went to the doctor over in Europe, where of course there's socialized medicine, was seen that day for his stomach bug, paid, he said, less than the cost of a dinner, and was able to receive medicine and care that day. And, and that's what it cost him. Now, had he been a citizen of that country, wouldn't have cost him anything. It's part of the deal. And so, I just let me tell you what's happening. One of the reasons that we have such high cost in terms of our healthcare system right now. I mean, one of the many reasons, and one of the reasons why this is the stupidest healthcare system on the face of the earth. While everybody around us has a better system that's more that's more consumer friendly and does a better job and has better outcomes all the way around, we have this ridiculous system that's still in place. But one of the reasons why it's so high is that we have an inordinate amount of very poor people in this country who don't have coverage of any sort. And they go, and people who are not all that poor, but they fall into a coverage gap, like in the state of Alabama, where there's some, 100,000 people or so now still in this coverage gap, even with the efforts that have been put in place to kind of close that gap. There's still six figures worth of people that are in this gap, and those people get sick. Those people get sick and they go to get care, and that care is essentially given to them. That's the socialized medicine part that nobody talks about, is that we are giving them this care and all the rest of us are paying for it. And we are paying for the most expensive care on earth. Not only are we paying them for emergency care for a lot of these folks that is far more expensive than just regular care, we're also paying to correct catastrophic problems that we could have corrected for a much lower cost early on if we had addressed simple things that later turn into these catastrophic issues by allowing these folks to have the health care. It would have cost us far less money, and it would have driven down our prices substantially, which was, I know Obama likes it to be called Obamacare, but Obama's original idea was for essentially a one-payer system out there. A single-payer system.
Single-payer. That's
right.
Yeah.
And that was not going to pass. And so he pivoted to a Republican-created plan. This was created, the Obamacare was created by Republicans, I believe, modeled on a system put in place in Massachusetts by then-Governor Mitt Romney. And so that's how we ended up with this sort of thing here. But that wasn't what everybody wanted. Everybody wanted this Medicare for all system, basically, in which, we modeled this after the Medicare system, which everybody on Medicare seems to like a whole lot,
Yeah.
And it boggles my mind that we cannot see the basic math of this thing, and we cannot understand how this would be so much better.
There's the basic math of it. There's also just the common sense idea that if you have a society in which you intentionally allow a set of people to go neglected, essentially,
yes,
who are not allowed access to the same kind of care as everybody else, their lack of health is eventually going to have an impact on the rest of us. So for purely selfish reasons, we ought to be trying to ensure that everybody has a basic level of health care that is preventative in nature and that promotes a healthier society. We still don't seem to get that we're all connected, and that if you've got a group of people over here that are more susceptible to disease and sickness and chronic sickness, it's going to affect the rest of us in terms of public health. It's going to affect the rest of us in terms of cost. It's going to affect the rest of us in terms of how our society functions, its efficiency. Think about the fact that a lot of the people that fall into the categories that are not going to be receiving the kind of health care that the rest of us have the potential to enjoy are people often that are in the service industry. And so, again, it puts the rest of us in a vulnerable position. So for no other reason than selfish ones, we ought to be concerned about that. And then finally, I got to say this. It astounds me, and it continues to astound me to this day, that especially here in the Bible Belt South, how many people are repulsed by the idea that immigrants should be cared for.
Yeah.
When the New Testament and some parts of the Old Testament are very explicit in the Bible about caring for the stranger, for the immigrant. And how in the world we've gotten this thing so demonically twisted that there is something wrong with caring for the immigrant and the stranger among us, is beyond me. It's unbiblical. I would even argue it's satanic to those of you who go to church. It's satanic to think that we should be neglecting and disregarding and even dismissive and abusive towards people simply because they weren't born here.
Yeah.
That's just the antithesis of Christianity.
Yeah, we brought up SNAP earlier, and the food stamp program, basically.
Yeah.
There's somebody who sent me a chart not too long ago that showed, actually a couple days ago, that showed a breakdown, the racial breakdown of families that receive SNAP benefits. And I replied back and said, I see that 100% of the people who receive SNAP benefits are humans. I don't understand why we're still doing this. It's like I've said before, I've never, the idea of race-based discrimination, the idea that you dislike somebody because of the color of their skin tell people that I want you to say out loud sometime that I dislike these people because of the color of their eyes. And I want you to think about how stupid that sounds and then just apply it to skin. Just apply it to skin. It's so utterly absurd and ridiculous. It's such an arbitrary thing to base your dislike of somebody or your feelings towards somebody on. It doesn't have any effect at all over whether that's a good person or not. There's so many other things that fall into that. And it never ceases to amaze me how we go to that in every single argument, in every single fight. And we have so many people who are so jealous. They're so jealous of people receiving food stamps. And there was another great breakdown. And this is the one that I don't understand how Democrats and everybody else, every decent person out there has not latched onto. And our taxes right now, we pay essentially zero. The average working person, until you reach, I believe it's above $200,000 in income, individual income. Until you reach to that level of income, you pay $0 in taxes for Obamacare subsidies that go to anybody. Okay, you pay $36 a year. The average person pays $36 a year in taxes that benefit people who are on food stamp and assistance programs.
$3 a month? $3 a month.
You pay nearly $6,000 a year. The average person pays nearly $6,000 a year in taxes that go to corporate subsidies. So the next time you bitch about the poor Hispanic guy, the poor black guy, the poor whoever guy getting some food at the grocery store, I want you to think about who you're actually should be pissed off at. Okay.
So that's a difference, Josh, between $500 a month and $3 a month.
Yeah, exactly. And, just consider, you know what? And here's the thing. I shouldn't have said what I said right there, because you don't have to be pissed off at anybody. Okay. You don't have to be pissed off about any of it. Okay. You could just say, this is the thing. This is the system that we've created in America, because I'll be honest with you, a lot of that $6,000 in subsidies that go to some of those corporations, some of it's necessary. Some of it's needed. Some of it produces jobs that then go back into the community and allow folks to have good jobs and good pay and good roads and good other things that happen here because of those subsidies that are going to those corporations. Okay. But I want people to put it into perspective over what you're complaining about. Now, that's to me we've got to stop this deal where we want to vilify everybody, man. And it just start treating people with a little more respect and a little more dignity, and stop being assholes. That ought to be our slogan. Stop being assholes. And I think
put it on a t-shirt. Put it on a t-shirt. Sell it.
That's a good idea.
That should be some of our merch. some of our Alabama Politics This Week merch.
We're going to create our own store. I've always wanted to create T-shirts. I would be a fantastic T-shirt creator. All right. I am going to create some T-shirts. We're going to sell the shit out of some T-shirts. All right. And the first one in the store is the Don't Be an Asshole T-shirt. Okay. And that should be the slogan. I mean, it's a don't be an asshole, and I don't know. But all right. Speaking of not being an asshole, we have a fantastic guest coming up for you. It's Dr. Jim Vickery. He has got a new book coming out, and I'm telling you, Dr. Jim is a treasure. Not the most technologically gifted person that you'll come to find, but once you get Jim to turn that camera sideways, he knows what he's talking about. So we'll get him on hopefully in just a few minutes, and we'll talk about his book and his life growing up in this state and some of the things he's done. It's Alabama Politics This Week, brought to you by our friends at Wind Creek Entertainment. We're back in a minute. All righty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person, and we are happy now to be joined by Dr. Jim Vickery. He's a longtime professor and, all around rabble rouser, I would say. Just a guy that you couldn't,
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Jim's got a new book out, and I want to let you tell everybody kind of what it's about and stuff. And so let's start there. Talk just for a second about the book and the kind of impetus behind it, because I think you and I have a little bit of things in common, just kind of reading through some of the speech that you gave at Auburn recently and some other things about the book. But talk about it and kind of how you came up with the idea.
Sure. Glad to do that, and glad to see both of you, and glad to be with you. I wrote the book which started in 2019 with the question, why did I change my attitudes about race when most of my friends did not? And what accounted for that? What experiences that I had that caused me to come out at the age of 23 in a different place? My father was a racist, and I grew up in Jim Crow, Montgomery, trying to figure out all the unwritten rules of Jim Crow in those days, which was quite an experience in itself. The written rules were not the problem. The unwritten rules were. I once called a black woman a black lady, and I was called down for that by a relative who said, black women are women, white women are white ladies. And I thought to myself, well, what is the underlying rationale for that one? It was just one of the many experiences that I had, but my beginning of a change on race occurred when I was about 8 years old. My first black friend I met in Burkeville, down in Lowndes County on Highway 80, where the civil rights marchers would walk through in 1965. His name was Blue Jesus. He had the blackest skin I had ever seen then or since. It was African black, such that in bright direct sunlight, I'm sure David would know this, his skin was bluish or purplish. David's is more brown, and I don't think would have that experience, but Blue Jesus really did. And he and I played every day after school in the second grade. After we left our separate but unequal schools in Lowndes County, we met at my aunt and uncle's service station and store, which was right on Highway 80, and played until one day a relative of mine called me aside and said, Jimmy, you're spending too much time with Blue Jesus. And I said, well, why? How can I spend too much time with the only other kid in the neighborhood? And I never got an answer to that question. And we moved back to Montgomery a few months thereafter. And that question and many other questions caused me to begin to wonder about the rationale of Jim Crow. One of my favorites was, because I saw it so often, was the experience I had riding with relatives when they would take their black maids home at the end of the day. The black maids would never sit in the front seat. They always sat in the back seat as though they were being chauffeured by my relative home. And I would sit in the front seat with them. And I thought at the time, well, this is strange, because this is what rich people do. You're chauffeured by your chauffeur. And I don't understand what's going on here. And then I learned later that if a black man drove a car as nice as my uncle's, which was always a Buick Roadmaster, and he was stopped by police, he would reach under the front seat of his car and pull out his chauffeur's cap to show that this was not his car, which would be a little discombobulating for police in the 40s and 50s, that this was his employer's car, and therefore avoid the confrontation with the police. Those kinds of things I saw as a boy, and they bothered me, and I didn't know why. And over the years, I had many other questions like that, until finally on March 11th, 1965, at Auburn, working on my master's degree thesis on the Ku Klux Klan. I was sitting alone in a building where I worked part-time that night, and the music I was listening to was interrupted by a news bulletin, which announced that Boston minister James Reeb had been clubbed to death and had died as a result of that in Selma a couple of days earlier, but he didn't die until that night. And I said to myself, listening to that, well, that's it. I just can't continue to be even a moderate on race. I have got to change my views about these things and begin to act on them. And I did. I got active in civil rights organizations in Auburn, and my life was not the same after that. I ended up writing the first affirmative action program in Florida, which was one of the things that Governor DeSantis has undone in the recent years. I wrote the first comprehensive affirmative action plan in Alabama higher education when I was president at Montevallo. And over the years, tried to make up for some of what I inherited and some of what I experienced. And I've written in detail in my book about all the other ways in which I encountered the inconsistencies of racism and the unjustification of racism. And so it's come out at that.
Right. Yeah. It's you just reading through the things. It strikes me, as obviously there were a lot of differences between me growing up in the 80s, basically, in the 80s and some in the 90s, versus where you were in the 60s, or before, prior to the 60s, and what was taking place in this state. There's in a lot of ways a bit of a different world, but I feel like we had some of the same experiences, in that we both. I had a number of black friends growing up because of where I went to high school. I went to high school at Austin High School in Decatur. At the time, we were pretty evenly split white-black students. I played a lot of basketball growing up. Austin was a big basketball school, unlike a lot of the football schools around here. And so I always played a lot of basketball. And in basketball, if you were going to play and you wanted to play serious and you loved it like we did, well, then you ended up playing with a lot of black guys, and a lot of those guys became my friends. And I saw their home lives. I went into their houses. I went, we rode around together in their cars. I came to have an understanding that they are basically like me. Their families are a lot like my family. They wanted the same. Their mamas and daddies wanted the same thing as my mom and daddy wanted. They wanted us to go to school, not to to pick our crap up outside. Not to give them a bunch of nonsense, and to come home on time. And so it always kind of struck me as so odd that we had these attitudes towards folks just based on their skin color. And then as I, progressed through college and whatnot, I came to kind of understand more of the history and what had taken place. And, it's really weird that, and it's kind of a testament to the lack of history that I think we get in our high schools a lot now, or at least back then. I shouldn't say now, but at least back then, because I didn't have a firm understanding of how we got to this point until I got into college good. And it's, what struck me though still today is, and it still happens today in some places, not as much. People tend to know me now, but I still get from time to time the other white people who believe that because we share white skin, I also share their racism with them.
I get that too.
Yeah, and it does that still strike you as infuriating or as insulting as it does to me?
Well, it's bothersome. I've had it happen with relatives and with friends. And the question you encounter every time in a social situation like that is, do I want to confront this now and
Yes. Yeah.
change this situation and irritate a relative, say at Thanksgiving or Christmas, or just let this pass? And I've let things pass. I've had my share of letting things pass over the years because of that. I'm much more likely to say my piece in a small group setting or in a large group setting.
Right.
I have found it easier over the years to talk to groups about these issues than to talk one on one with a racist relative, say. And I've had fewer of the latter than the former. And it does bother me that people just assume that you share all their attitudes just because you have the same pigmentation of skin color. And so, yes, I do. In fact, I share a lot of things with you, Josh. You know, I almost always agree with what you write. And I wonder to myself, am I reading Josh carefully enough? Shouldn't I be disagreeing with more things he's writing? But I don't. Lenore and I both appreciate your writings and share your views. And I know you get some interesting mail because of that time to time. But
Yes.
when I was SGA president at Auburn, I had an early experience of this when my life was threatened as a result of a radio program I was doing. And so I had some early opportunities to deal with that kind of criticism and personal attacks. And got some interesting letters when I was on the Auburn faculty back during the Wallace days. Uh, how did they let you on the faculty, you liberal pinko so and so? That was one of my favorites. And it was an
Well, it
interesting
never
time.
changes, does it? It just never changes.
No, it doesn't. It's interesting. It's one of the fascinating things about growing up in this state and still living here, especially right now. I keep waiting for the fever to break, and it just won't break. In fact, there are active forces now, as both of you know, trying to take us back to the way it was in the 40s and 50s in the era of white supremacy. And that if there's anything motivating the national Republican MAGA movement, in my opinion, it's that people want to take us back to the way it was, the way they think they remember the 50s, when everything was, you could leave your door unlocked, when everything was safe and secure, people thought. And it's amazing how selective we are about our memories that way. It was never the way we remember it. Uh, and it's just fascinating to me. And I'm sure David must have had some experiences along these lines and wondered listening to white people talk about the good old days, which weren't so good old days for some of your relatives, David. And I remember that very
Right,
well.
right, and I know you do, and of course I've heard and read a lot of stories, Dr. Vickery. I want to ask you about a few things here, and let me just say it's kind of interesting to hear two what I would call very enlightened white men talk about race. It's not something that black people get a lot of opportunity to have. So it's interesting. You mentioned James Reeb, and I while you and Josh were talking, I went and looked up the fact that James Reeb and Viola Liuzzo were both assassinated in the same month. James Reeb was assassinated about 14 days before Viola Liuzzo was. So there was something very volatile in the air in March of 1965 as it relates to white people who were standing up for black people and who were subsequently killed. When you decided to change your mind about race, did you ever feel that your life was in danger?
It crossed my mind, David, but it worried my mother more than it worried me. And eventually it worried my first wife more than it worried me. I decided early on that I couldn't control that. And I was not going to live my life in fear as a result, and have just expressed myself as openly as I could down through the years. This is the first time I've written a whole book about all of this. I was on the Auburn faculty in the 60s my life has been bookended by George Wallace. He came into the governorship my senior year at Auburn, and he and I were in the Jackson Hospital at the same time when he rolled in for the last time and died at that hospital. And I know his family, and I was a friend of his, but I always opposed his racial policies. And somehow that never got him, never bothered him. He was chairman of the board of trustees at BONEHEAD when I was president, and never once gave me any difficulties. In fact, when I was the search committee asked me to be president, they said this is all subject to one thing: you have to go by the governor's office and get cleared by George Wallace. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's a step you don't normally hear about in presidential searches. And I went by, and he said, Jimmy, there's only one thing I want you to do for me as president, and you won't have any trouble from me otherwise. And that is, don't become one of those knee-jerk liberal college professors who opposes everything George Wallace proposes just because it comes from George Wallace. And I told him, Governor, you would never have that problem from me. And I didn't oppose his policies, his program after that. I continued to oppose the racial past that he had, and he knew that. But he had changed too. That's one of the most interesting things in Alabama history to me. After he was nearly murdered in Maryland, he changed. And I found that fascinating as I watched it up close and from afar. And it took me several years to believe that his views on race had actually changed, because in 1982, he ran against my best friend in Alabama politics, George McMillan. And if George had been elected governor, he would have been a New South governor, and Alabama's history would have been different. And I left the state the night of the election and went to California for a meeting in Hollywood. I was on the Alabama Film Commission. They did that in those days. When I left, George had won. George McMillan had won. When I got to California, they had found mysteriously votes in Barber County that put Governor Wallace over the top in that election, which to this day I still believe was not properly
Yeah,
done.
Bob
But
Riley
anyway,
found some of those votes a few years later. Yeah.
but anyway, it took me several years to come around to the view that Governor Wallace, when he went to the Dexter Church here in Montgomery one Sunday night unannounced and asked to speak, and turned and spoke to the congregation and said he had changed, and he wanted them to forgive him. And they used that during the 1982 campaign. And I thought, that is really insincere. I just can't buy that. I came to be wrong in my mind and believe that he did change.
Let me ask you a follow-up about that, because I've talked to his daughter, Peggy Wallace Kennedy, several times, and she indicated to me that when she was a child, the atmosphere in their home was almost the antithesis of the public display that we saw from Governor Wallace. She said that, they were taught to speak respectfully to the black people who worked in their home. She said that around the kitchen table, there was no conversation about, race, no racial epithets used. Her recollection is that in the home, the Wallace, the tone that Governor Wallace set would probably be described as moderate to possibly even liberal. Does that seem conceivable to you?
Sure, because Governor Wallace, in my view, was a moderate before he lost to John Patterson in 1958 and decided that he would never be outsegged again, as he later said it, but used the N-word at the time, as a famous reporter told me he did. They denied it, but he told me he did because he was there and he heard him say it. Yeah. And the black lawyers in Alabama say that when Governor Wallace was judge in Barber County, he was the only judge in the state who treated them with respect, and they appreciated that. J.L. Chestnut in Selma is one of the lawyers who had that experience with them. But despite all that, when Peggy was a teenager, she told me, and she's written in her book, that which is a wonderful book, by the way. Everybody should read Peggy's A Broken Road book. It's just outstanding. We used to be in the same Sunday school class here in Montgomery before she moved to Birmingham, and got a chance to talk with her a lot about this. When she was a teenager, she opposed her father's racial policies, but she couldn't say so. She could not even talk with her mother, with whom she talked about most things, about that issue because of concern. She was so supportive of her husband, she didn't feel like she could talk with her. And so she had nowhere to turn later, despite that moderate home life that you're talking about, David. She came to be very conflicted about her racial views and about the environment in which she was living, and that she couldn't talk about it. That's one reason she wrote a book later and began to make a speech. I heard her make the first speech that became this book at the King Church a number of years ago at a gathering to honor the co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center here in Montgomery, Mr. Dees, whom I've always admired. And that speech just blew me away. And I told her husband, Justice Kennedy, that they have got to get that out and to let people know that the daughter of George Wallace is talking and thinking this way, which they did, not because I said it was a good idea, but they did it. Got it on the Today Show and had a lot of national publicity, wrote her book, and just did a marvelous job of showing the other side of Southern racism that we all have to deal with. I consider myself, for example, a recovering racist, David. I don't think any white person born and raised in the South ever overcomes the effects of the scarlet fever of racism. You can tell yourself, and you can think to yourself mentally, that I'm past this. My conversion put me on the other side of this matter. But it's still there. It will pop up in the darndest places when you are in an encounter suddenly with a black person and you do the wrong thing. You realize later. I've had that happen to me several times. And it's just a part of growing up here.
Right. So, Dr. Vickery, I just have two more questions for you. The first one is what your assessment is of what's at the root of white supremacy. And I want to set it up by sharing a very quick story. There's a brilliant movie that the late, great John Singleton made called Rosewood. And in the movie Rosewood, there's a scene in which you have, before the town of Rosewood, Florida, was burned to the ground by white people in a neighboring town, there's a scene in which you see a small group of white men talking. And one of the white men comments on the fact that one of the black residents of Rosewood owns a piano. And he says something along the lines of, that N-word has a piano? How does he have a piano? I don't have a piano. How does he have a piano? And I always thought that was a seminal moment in the film, because it seemed to really distill racism down to something very primal, sort of this idea of entitlement and superiority based on race, and even a sort of a visceral kind of envy, perhaps, infused in there as well. What's your assessment of what's at the root of white supremacy?
Oh, wow, David, what a question that is. I've written a whole book on that, and I'm still working on it. I think white supremacy is a part of the American history. It's a part of the American South. It's a part of our upbringing, and it's very hard to overcome for that reason. Even those of us who have made a turn of the corner and think we are acting and being in different ways find it keeps popping up in our lives. I've seen Rosewood, by the way. I think it's a terrific movie. I used to review film on radio and TV and in print when I was at Montevallo, and saw that one on television, as I recall, and recommend it to everybody. I think envy was a part of racism and is a part of it, which is why Kendi the national scholar I.X. Kendi has written so well about this and said that it used to be said that if black people would just work hard, this was the Booker T. Washington approach, work hard, make themselves indispensable members of the community, economically and culturally, that then they would be accepted by white people. And the history has shown that is not true, that the approach of his great rival Du Bois at the time was more right than he was, who said politics has to come before economic and cultural development. But until we have the right to vote and have political power, nothing's going to change. And that's pretty much the way it's been historically, I think. And that's a part of why this keeps coming up. I think the fact that President Trump is doing what he's doing in so many ways is based on assumptions related to white supremacy. Now, his followers would deny that. He would deny that because nobody likes to be called or be thought of as a racist. People will accept being homophobic, anti-women, xenophobic, but they don't like being called and don't call themselves racist. I've never heard a white person in my 83 years of life call himself or herself a racist person, but it's there. And I think we have to consider ourselves recovering racists at best. So I think white supremacy has been there from the beginning, since 1619, and it's still with us today.
Yeah.
Incidentally, one of the things I've learned from Kendi and his books is that this old shibboleth that, history, we've always had slavery in history. So we've always had racial discrimination. But that's not true. We've always had slavery, but it was not based on race. The slavery in the Bible, the slavery in Rome and ancient Greece was not based on skin pigmentation. And
That's
so
right.
all those examples are irrelevant to modern day times in which it is based on skin pigmentation and not just on intellectual or cultural or other differences. And I had several experiences at Auburn along those lines that convinced me skin pigmentation was not the issue at all. I don't have a really good answer to your question, David. I think we would have to talk hours about that to get to the bottom of it.
Right. Well, we'll just keep poking at it. I mean, it may take lifetimes to really figure it out ultimately. But let me ask you one final question. You mentioned to Josh that you had worked on, that your master's thesis was on the KKK. How did you arrive at that topic, and what did you discover in the course of your research?
Well, Klanism is always with us. It's had millions of followers at different points in American history, but a Klan idea has always been with us. I had an uncle who was an informer for the FBI in the Ku Klux Klan and was related in some way I've never been able to identify to the Viola and the Uzo case. He may have been in the car of the men who shot her. It's not clear to me, but he was a part of some aspect of that.
Well, if I may interrupt you, Doctor, you do know that one of the men in the car was indeed clearly identified as an FBI informant. I can't remember his name right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was my uncle or not. I know my uncle's name, but that's just a part of our family history that we've never been able to identify. But the Ku Klux Klan thesis came out of watching the first episode of Profiles in Courage, a TV series based on the John Kennedy book. The first episode was about Oscar Underwood, the senator from Alabama, who ran for president in 1912 and 1924. His race for the presidency in 24 caused the New York City Democratic Convention to go over 100 ballots. It's the longest one in American history. He didn't get the nomination, but he proposed an anti-Klan plank in the Democratic Party platform in 1924. It almost passed. It didn't pass by less than a vote. It was something like a half a vote difference in the voting that would have changed the platform that year. I had never heard of Oscar Underwood. I think he's the greatest national politician this state has ever turned out. He was majority leader in both houses of Congress, ran for president twice, and Woodrow Wilson offered him a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, which he didn't take. He was an outstanding person. He was also a racist, incidentally, as all figures are in American history, as Abraham Lincoln was, as most white people were before our time, and I would argue at least are recovering racists today. Because he raised the issue of the Klan, which had about 5 million members at the time, he got beat for the presidency. And I was fascinated by that. And so I did my thesis on him and his speeches against the Klan, which took me into the literature on the history of the Klan, which I found fascinating. And that's when I began to realize that the Klan mentality has always been a part of American life. It's been called different things, and know nothings back in the in the late 19th century. Others, white supremacists by other names. That mentality still exists in our country. It certainly exists in Alabama. If you rub the social services of any town in this state, you will find racism somewhere underneath the veneer. And that has always fascinated me and disappointed me too, because while we're making progress on one hand, we're still holding on to the past on the other, which raises an interesting question, David, which I found, and I like to ask audiences when I give talks on my book. Which came first, racism or slavery? That always stumps people. No one has a very strong and clear response to that. Most people would say, well, of course, racism came first. That was what justified slavery. But that's not so. He argues, and he convinced me. Slavery came first. It became an economically viable activity of the Portuguese and the Spanish first, then later other European countries. They began to get criticism for slavery. The justification for slavery then developed, which we now call racism. The lack of intellect of black people in Africa, the lack of culture, the fact they had no civilization, which is a lie in history. And that then evolved into what we today call racist thinking. So slavery came first, he argues, and I say this too. Racism came later. That then changes the way you approach that issue if you accept that thesis. And I recommend Kendi's book. He's written several. One is How to Be an Anti-Racist. Another one before that won a National Book Award. I can't remember the exact title of it at the moment. But the title thought is They've Always Been That Way. But it quotes a speech from Jefferson Davis back in the 1850s and 60s. And so I can go on and on about that. Because of these things are all interrelated, and this issue is so difficult to untie and to talk about in a rational way. Generally, most people leave me at this point. Yeah. You know, the response I get is, yeah, well, we'll never disagree. There's no reason for us to have to talk about this anymore. And I want to say, when that happens, that the assumptions of democracy include the notion that we will discuss public issues. If my arguments are better than your arguments, you're obligated in our system to accept those arguments and be persuaded. And the reverse is true. If your arguments are better than my arguments, I'm committed to, and I used to teach this in argumentation and debate, I'm committed to changing my mind if I don't have a better argument. Well, you can imagine how far I get with that in social settings.
Yeah. Now we just scream fake news and you're stupid, and we move along.
You just don't understand.
Right. Yeah. Well, listen, Dr. Vickery, thank you so much for coming on with us and spending some time and talking about this. Yes. And the book is Awakenings to Racism in Alabama, the education of a native son and the lessons he and his peers learned resisting Jim Crow. I'm assuming people can find this at their normal outlets. Can they get it through Amazon, those type places?
Through Amazon. The EJI bookstore here in Montgomery has it, as well as New South Books here in Montgomery.
Fantastic. Well, listen,
Josh, you and David have been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
Great talking to you too, sir.
Yeah, that is Dr. Jim Vickery. As you can tell from the time we spent with him, he's just a fantastic resource for people. He has, the book is great. The stories are even better. If you can make it, look up and see if you can find one of the places where he's going around and giving one of the speeches and talks. And do you have any upcoming events, Dr. Vickery?
No, the next one is speaking to a group here in Montgomery at First United Methodist Church. I'm hoping to do the bookstore in Fairhope early next year. That's one of my favorite bookstores in the state, and I look forward to being down there at some point. But those are the next two.
Well, if you can make it to one of those and can ask the questions and carry on the conversations with Dr. Vickery, I really encourage you to do so.
I'd love to come to Huntsville anytime, Josh. So if you want to host,
we'll see what we can do. Yeah, listen, there's a great little bookstore up here as well. We'll find a place for you.
Yeah,
we'll find a place for you. But Dr. Jim, thank you so much, sir. We really do appreciate you.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks, David.
All right. Hey, we're going to slide out. We're going to come back. We'll wrap this thing up on the other side. It's Alabama Politics This Week. We're back in a minute. Alrighty, welcome back. Alabama Politics This Week. Josh Moon, David Person. Thanks to Dr. Jim Vickery for spending some time with us. Really appreciate him. Really also appreciate his wife getting the thing turned off for him and the assistance that she provided that none of you've seen and you have no idea, but she was fantastic. She is. They were both great. They were both great.
Absolutely.
Thanks to them. Thanks to our friends at Wind Creek Entertainment for sponsoring us and for all they do for us and the rest of the state. Thanks to the folks at SPLC for sponsoring us and for all that they do. And our friend Morris Dees, or my friend Morris Dees, that was ousted at SPLC, but was the founder over there. He Morris did some fantastic work. I hate it ended the way that it did at SPLC with him and some of the other folks. I do. As a matter of fact, as weird as it sounds, the other day, I don't know what happened. I got I noticed that there was a missed voicemail on my phone. And it was from like 2 months ago. I just found this yesterday, and it was from like 2 months ago. And I've never seen it. I clear mine off, my stuff, my voicemails and stuff off.
Yeah, me too.
So I don't have anything kind of lingering. And so I had to scroll way down to try to figure this out. I don't know what happened, where I was, why it didn't show up, or whatever. But it was a message from Morris Dees. He and his wife Katie were coming through the area up here and wanted to meet for dinner with me and my wife, and I just completely missed him. So I'm gonna have to give Morris a call. I missed that. And so, but you want to talk about a guy with some stories. Still to this day, probably the single greatest public confrontation I have ever witnessed in my life was when they invited Morris Dees to speak at the end of the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March, and they put him on the stage. They put him on the stage with Robert Bentley, and he just absolutely crushed him. Just crushed him.
Wow.
With him sitting right there.
Wow.
I mean, and it was all, listen, it was all legitimate criticism. It was all things that people wanted to say, not about the sex scandal that was coming later. And so that's one of the things Morris would have never gotten involved with, really. But, but I mean, it was, you know what I'm saying?
I know.
Yeah, right. So, but listen, thanks to our friends over at SPLC.
I interviewed him backstage one time at an event, and he was interesting.
Yes.
But you know what I realized, Josh?
What's that?
People who do what Morris Dees did have to be wired very differently than most other people.
Yeah.
And that means they are probably going to be inclined to do things that perhaps they shouldn't always be doing. And saying things that perhaps they shouldn't always be saying. But in order to be able to be the kind of person to take on the Ku Klux Klan, you got to have a certain kind of gumption, and a certain kind of, and I'm just going to say, ego, and so that's your superpower when it comes to dealing with the Klan and other agencies of evil. But it also may be your Achilles heel when it comes to other parts of your life.
It is. Listen, I've come to realize that people, most everyone, especially powerful people, people that ascend to a certain level in life for whatever walk of life they're in, they almost always have a singular flaw. Something that is a drawback. One of the greatest examples is Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is probably the greatest retail politician in our lifetime. He is so good at connecting with people. He is so fantastic at what he does. He is so great at working across the aisle and figuring out ways to move things forward. Listen, Bill Clinton I don't care what you think of the man personally. This is not about personal, because I'm going to get into that. But he's the greatest. He is the greatest at it. Okay. Just go and read about what he did and how he did it and how he worked it. He's the greatest at it, but he's got that flaw, he's got that. And we all know what that flaw is. And it's the women, and he could never overcome it, no matter what he did and what he does. And we see now, that it may be an even worse flaw than we thought. Which it was related to the Epstein stuff, and if so, that's a man that's got to go. You got to go serve your time and and pay your penance. I'm going to have to get rid of my Bill Clinton shoes and my Bill Clinton flag and my Bill Clinton yard signs. But it's
I watched him. I was up in Washington D.C. with the family of Willis Moore, who was he was a deputy trooper here in North Alabama, who was tragically killed in an interstate accident. And they went up to the White House to be honored, or to receive an honor, really, I guess, on Willis's behalf. And the Huntsville Times sent me with them, and sent me up there with the family, and to document this, because it was, very significant. In fact, some folks here in North Alabama may know that 255, a major, I guess we'll say interstate spur, is named after Willis V. Moore.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we go up there. We're on the White House lawn. The family is way up in the front, where the president is, along with probably scores of other families. I'm probably 100 yards away, 50 yards away probably,
right,
with the press. But even from that distance, I could see that after President Clinton made his remarks, he comes off of the stage and he starts walking this crowd, shaking hands. And he stops at every single person, looks them in the eye, talks to them. He's not only shaking with one hand, but it seemed like he was often using his other hand to put over that hand to really solidify that clasp. And the way he was looking at people, I thought, my God, there it is. That's the thing. That's the thing that separates him from so many other politicians and people, because even from the distance where I was Josh, I could see that in that moment, Clinton didn't see anybody but that person in front of him.
Yeah.
Eye to eye contact.
Yep.
And that's the kind of contact that can make men and women melt.
Yeah.
And I think, again, his superpower was also his Achilles heel.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And I'll say this, Trump has a little bit of that ability to kind of, connect with people, in a crowd as well. You see him work the crowd or whatever. He's a very personable guy with a lot of people, with a certain crowd. He gets out, he's very confident, but he's not the Clinton level. He's not the connecting on an emotional level sort of thing. He's more the big oaf in the room, the gregarious sort of guy that, is telling the off-color joke, or, making, a witty remark to somebody here or there or whatever. He's that guy. and he's willing to do it in front of pretty much anybody, which I think, kind of endears him to a lot of people, that he's in here making these kind of crass remarks in front of these uppity folks or whatever, even though he is the most uppity of the uppity folks there is. And so I think that there's some level of that bleeds into the Trump appeal to some people, but then of course he negates it with being a completely ineffectual leader and president, and completely worthless in pretty much every other way. But Clinton was so great. He was so great at that. But it's like I'm saying, though, it's all great people have these. Everybody has flaws. They just do.
Yep,
I mean, if
you're
thinking they don't, then you're going to be disappointed in whoever you're thinking that of. Okay? But our thanks to the folks at SPLC for what they do in sponsoring and stuff, and we really do appreciate them. All right, before we get to our bonehead, we need to get to the other bonehead, the typical bonehead. That's Tommy Tuberville. Tommy had was asked about Trump running for a third term recently. This has been a talk. Popped back up again this week. Apparently someone asked Trump about this, and he kind of brushed it aside initially, then later said something, I don't know. It's Trump speaks out of both sides of his mouth so often, it's just impossible to keep up with it. But Tuberville was asked about this, and Tuberville said, well, listen, you never count Trump out. You never know. He may go figure out a way to go around the Constitution. That'll be up to him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I
what?
think, and that's what I was just going to say. I think that is so damning. The fact that a sitting U.S. senator, an aspiring governor of a state, would actually endorse the idea of circumventing the Constitution. That's lawlessness.
Would be okay with it.
That's lawlessness.
Yes.
That's what you're advocating. You're advocating for lawlessness.
You've taken an oath to this.
Yeah, exactly. As a U.S. senator, he took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and to abide by it, adhere to it. As the governor of this state, he would be, if he were so elected, and God forbid, but if he were, he'd be taking an oath to uphold the Constitution of this state. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, also the United States, but I know for sure the state of Alabama. And so he's basically saying he's okay with lawlessness. That's what he's saying. Why vote for a guy like that? How can you vote for a guy that's saying up front, I'm okay if somebody is lawless as long as their level of lawlessness or their ideology matches mine? That's insane.
Yeah, it is. It is. But it's where we are. It's where we are in it right now. I mean, we've divided up the teams, and people have picked their team, and no matter what the team members do, they got to support them. They're going to support them. It doesn't matter. I mean, we talked about I don't know if we talked about the farmers last week or not. I think we did talk about Alpha and the endorsements of the Republican candidates who are backing the tariffs that are bankrupting the farmers. I mean, it's just what more do you need? I mean, would you literally vote for this Republican if he came and set the house on fire for you? I mean, where do you draw the line? What does that person need to do before you'll stop voting for these people? I don't understand it. I don't. It just doesn't make any sense. And to that end, we've got the beef, the Cattlemen's Association this week finally taking a stand to say, look, man, this stuff you're doing with the Argentinian beef folks down there, you're killing us. You're going to kill us here. We're already, we're finally making a little bit of money because the prices have gone up if you bought beef anywhere lately. And we're now making a little bit of money, but you do this and you're going to undercut us and it's going to put us out of business. But Trump's just pushing right on, telling them, don't worry about it. I got you. And we know what's coming. Another bailout's coming, it just.
What? I mean, I don't get it. Now, as you know, I don't eat meat, so I haven't bought any beef in years and decades. But I find it astounding, really astounding, that they could be so slow, considering what Trump has been doing, that they're so slow to have this reaction.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, Josh, and maybe you can help me out here, because I'll admit I haven't been following this. Again, I don't eat meat. I don't really keep up with that. But what in the world do you expect them to do when election time comes? I mean, is this just a temporary kind of ouch? Hey, you're hurting us, but we're still going to support you, Daddy. Or is this a Daddy? We're pissed off and we're leaving. We're running away from home forever. What is it?
I'll be honest with you and say that I don't know what the hell people are doing anymore. I really don't. I don't know. Look, I've had conversations with people, things that I've written in the last 6 months or so about some people, would be enough in years past to end the political careers of people. It would be over. It would be over. They would be done. They would never come back. And today it's just a, who knows? That's Wednesday. We'll see what happens on Thursday. And so who knows? I would like to think that maybe, being on the brink of losing your farm and your livelihood and all you've ever known and things that have been in your family for generations might send somebody to vote for people with other ideas and better outcomes. And let's be clear. Because the Democrats have not, this is another problem that I've had with Democrats about this and I said this to our friend, Anthony Daniels this week, who agreed with me, was Democrats need to start going to alpha meetings and anytime there's a collection of more than 3 farmers standing around talking, a Democrat needs to hop in the circle and say, hey, I got some ideas for you. Listen to what we did last time. And here's what we're going to do again, and telling them about their ideas for helping them out, because believe it or not, the Democrats have been far more helpful to the American farmer in terms of policy ideas, both ideas in terms of raising and lowering prices that benefit them, and setting them up so they are not devastated by climate change. And if you have some doubts about the way the climate has shifted in this country, go and ask some farmers sometime what they feel about that. And they'll tell you a whole story about what the way things used to be versus where they are now, and when they used to get the crops out versus when they do now, and when they used to plant versus when they do now, and how they do watering and irrigation in their fields versus what they used to be able to do. And that it'll be a whole enlightening story to you about these sorts of things. And Democrats have been on the forefront of helping those folks, making sure that they're not devastated by those changes and giving them the resources that they need to overcome them. And so that needs to be talked about more, because what is taking precedent over that apparently is this idea of identifying as a conservative. And, you can identify as a conservative and not a bankrupt conservative.
Yep.
You can be a conservative Democrat. We don't mind. I don't mind at all. You can be a conservative Democrat, and because really the only thing we've ever asked anybody to do is to leave people the hell alone. That's the wokeness that you're supporting with Democrats, is you just leave everybody alone and give them the same rights you got.
Yeah. Well, there was a day when there were liberal Republicans too. I mean, it's I think the lack of historical understanding,
yes,
the lack of an understanding of civics and basic politics has led us to the point where this polarization has gotten really ridiculous. And it's unfortunate because, again, people feel this sort of team loyalty even to their own detriment. I mean,
yes,
you got people that understand it. I mean, but then they're vilified. Liz Cheney, she's vilified, for example. Mitt Romney, he's vilified.
Boy, did you ever think you would say Liz Cheney in that sentence? I mean, you know what I mean?
No,
did you ever think you would say Liz Cheney?
No. Well, even think about, I mean, an even stranger twist right now. You're right. Even stranger than Liz Cheney right now is Marjorie Taylor Greene speaking out, because, again, she seemed, and as much as we have vilified her
yes,
on this podcast,
rightfully.
And I think rightfully so. You're right. She gets the fact that there is something wrong with the way the Republican Party has been handling this Epstein situation, and there's something wrong with the way the economic policies are affecting people. And she's, in her Georgia district, and she's being true to her constituents. Got to give her some props for that.
Yeah. It's, I I don't know. I think honestly, I think it's too dumb. I think she's too dumb to follow the lies. And so she just keeps asking about the basics. And, and at this point, the basics are really all you need. I mean, if you just look around and say, hey, wait a minute, weren't we, are we going to get rid of this health care? What's our plan to replace it? And there isn't one. And then, so I think that maybe she just kind of stumbled into some things. But
Mike Johnson claims there's some plans,
yeah.
but he won't say what they are.
What was it Trump called? Oh, the concepts of a plan. He's got concepts of a plan. There are concepts of a plan. There are concepts of a plan. Yeah. Well, those concepts of a plan are really costing you right now. All right, let's wrap this thing up with our bonehead. Our bonehead of the week is our Secretary of State Wes Allen and his newest idea, which is just straight up racism, and that is that you have to be a natural born United States citizen to be elected to office in the state of Alabama, the whole constitutional office in Alabama. Mm-hmm. That means you have to be born in the United States to run for or office in Alabama. And it's so stupid. It really is. It really is so stupid that this is a thing that you would talk. And we just, before we did the podcast, we did a TV show, and I told we brought this up on the TV show, and I told Bill, one of my favorite stories from World War II. And once you pass a certain age as a white male, you're required to really dig into World War II history. So it's just it's like, as I think Shane Gillis called it, early onset Republican. This is the first sign, the first symptom. It's the first symptom of early onset Republican is learning a lot about World War II. But it's one of my favorite stories from there. It's a story of Henry Meucci. He was a lieutenant colonel, basically created the 6th Battalion, 6th Infantry and Special Forces. And they were tasked with going into the jungles in the Philippines and rescuing POWs from a prison camp that was held by the Japanese. And there were some 500 folks in there. And he trained these guys for weeks, created this masterful plan, executed this masterful plan, got all 500 of those guys out, marched them. Some of these guys had been through the Bataan Death March, by the way. And so they were in terrible shape, marched them dozens of miles through the jungle, through enemy territory, managed to get out of there with losing 2 lives out of this. Somehow defeated more than 200 guards, all sorts of spies and other folks from the Japanese out there, utilized all these different people. The man was a mastermind. The folks that dealt with him, a lot of them named their kids after him. He was Henry Meucci was his name. Look him up sometime and look at what he was. Under Wes Allen's plan, a guy like Henry Meucci couldn't run for office in this country because he's not American enough to run because he was born in Italy. He was an Italian American, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of people who were not born in this country who have come in here and contributed far more than Wes Allen will ever contribute to this state, to this country, to anybody. And those people would be shut out of office in this state. And the voters of this state are apparently not smart enough to decide this on their own, and they need Wes Allen and today's Republicans to determine who we can and cannot vote for. Forget our free will.
Yeah, just like racism is dumb and illogical and makes no sense, as you and I were talking about with Dr. Vickery, and as we've talked about at other times on this podcast, xenophobia makes no sense. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with xenophobia, this idea that because somebody is foreign, because somebody's not native, that somehow makes them inherently incapable of, leading in the state of Alabama. Being an elected official in the state of Alabama makes them inherently dangerous in some form or way. And nobody, at least, and the thing that I find fascinating is they put this forward. Wes Allen and the legislators that are sponsoring this in the House and the Senate have put this forward as though it should be understood that we ought to automatically get it. I don't automatically get it. And that's because it makes no sense. And the example that you just put forward, Josh, is a classic example of why this is it's dumb, stupid bigotry. It is ignorant xenophobia.
No, it is. It is. And look, let me take it, because we know that this is a knee-jerk reaction to the New York City mayoral race. I mean, that's what this is. Okay, this is the Zoran Mandani sort of thing. This is scaring people about Muslims and how we've circled back around to this fear of Islam all of a sudden. I don't know what in the world is happening other than it's just in response to into this person. But we all know where that is, and we all know where it's going to go, which is nowhere. But let me ask you this. Both times Donald Trump has been elected, we have been given, as progressives, Democrats, whoever, we have been given these great speeches about and talked down to about how we need to now learn what it is. Why Donald Trump? We need to explore ourselves and do some soul searching and really consider the reasons why Americans and we're so drawn to Donald Trump and his rhetoric and the average American and all this stuff. Why aren't we having the same conversations about this Mandani? Why are we not having those same conversations, especially within the Democratic Party? I mean, Hakeem Jeffries just endorsed the guy this week. I don't know that Chuck Schumer still endorsed him. There is obviously something that this man, and I've listened to him speak. I've listened to his ideas.
Sharp fellow. Very sharp fella.
He's a very sharp fella. He relates very well to people. And as I've said about Bernie Sanders and AOC, and now this guy, what is it that he's saying as a working person that you disagree with? What's he saying out there that you find so offensive, or are you just finding him as offensive because of his name and his religion?
Well, I think it's all of the. I think it's all of the above.
Is he not palatable just because of that? And because I think otherwise, if you took his words and you put his words in, say, Trump's mouth, which would never happen because they're far too eloquent most of the time. But if you did that, I don't think there'd be a single Republican out here who would have any sort of a problem with what he was saying.
If you put his words in Trump's mouth?
Yes.
Well, maybe now they wouldn't because they've been so diluted by Trump, but I'm not sure. Some of the things Mandani's talked about, I think they would have found problematic coming from Trump prior to 2016.
Yeah.
Since 2016, I think they are definitely high and drunk on the Kool-Aid. But
what do you think they would have found? What do you think they would have found?
Well, I mean, his what he talks about in terms of the public transportation system and some other things that are populist in a way that are not just populist, but they are anti-capitalist. I think they would have a problem with coming from Trump. Again, maybe less so at this point because they're so.
Let me ask you this: Has he proposed taking percentages of companies for allowing them to do business in certain areas? Because our current communist in the White House has.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that goes again to what I'm saying about post 2016. I think there's a lot of stuff that they're swallowing that they never would have swallowed before, including. Some of this very, they used to be so pro states' rights, and now they're like, to hell with states' rights.
And I guess
they're swallowing a whole lot of stuff.
I guess I should have defined it better and not just say all Republicans, but the working class Republican. The average worker Republican person out there, particularly those ones who claim they've gone back and forth between Obama and Trump. Do you think that any of those folks would have had much of a problem with some of the ideas that have come from him? and some of the ideas that come from Bernie Sanders, some of the ideas that come from AOC, some of the things that focus, I think, on a bottom-up approach to the way we govern and rethinking the way that we govern, and so that we can kind of close that wealth gap that's killing us right now, that's killing people. I mean, just go and look at your grocery bill. This is what I would encourage people to do. Go right now. And if you order stuff online, let's say at Walmart, wherever, Target, wherever you order from, most of those places save your orders from everything you've ever ordered. Go back right now and find an old one from, say, 2 years ago, and sit and take a copy of everything you ordered, and then go and fill in and write down the cost of it. See what the cost of that order was. And now go and get that exact same order today and see what the cost is. And that's what we're talking about. It's not simply inflation that's driving that. Inflation's a lot of it. And I mean, I guess that would be technically the term for it, but it's being driven, I think, by a wealth gap that's jacking up the prices of pretty much everything around us, especially luxury items like cars and vacations and everything else. And it's pricing the average person out of every market out there. And it's only going to get worse unless we start taking some, you would call them radical ideas, but I would just say common sense ideas that some of these folks are preaching right now that are really starting to catch fire. It's just my ideas, but.
Well, we're in a strange place. We're in a strange place in society. We're in a strange place, in a scary place. And I do think that there is a lot of, xenophobic kind of sentiment that is, but there's one thing I do want to say before we go.
Sure.
In Wes Allen's justification for this legislation, he said that there was a reason our founding fathers put it into the Constitution that, the president had to be a native-born person. Okay. All right. But let's consider this. The very first president and subsequent presidents for a period of time, I don't know how long it went on, but probably for 20 or 30 years, were not native born.
They were not.
They were British.
And they're on all our money.
And they're on our money. Thank you. They're on our money.
Yeah. That's right. And our greatest president, born in Kenya.
Exactly. That is so funny. Kenya. Yeah. Hawaii's now part of Kenya.
Yeah. Well, listen, they planted that birth announcement back then. They planted it.
Right.
All right. Till next week, y'all be safe out there.
Peace.